So there's a couple of really cool new updates to the Drag and Drop Environments add-on. If you already own the add-on, then you should have received an email with a download link to get the latest version. If you don't own the add-on, then you can get that at blendersensei.com/store. I am in Sensei Format right now. That's why my version of Blender looks the way it does. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can also check that out over at blendersensei.com. But everything we're going to be doing in this video, you could also do with just default Blender and the Drag and Drop Environments add-on. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a file I was working on in my DND Environments promo folder here, and I'll press my expand library button. This is all part of Sensei Format, and I'll click and drag this file out into the 3D view. And then I'm just going to close that up. Okay, so first I want to say you may notice down here in my camera view that there is this live environment in the back. And so I'd already saved an environment while working on this file. However, you can't see it displayed by default in the 3D view. And so if you've ever been using Drag and Drop Environments add-on and you were playing with an environment and you can't see it when you load the file back up, this actually has to do with the way that Blender saves user preferences. But if you just want to press T to bring up your tool shelf and property shelf if in Sensei Format, or N if you are in default Blender, under your Environments tab here, which will show up when you have the Drag and Drop Environments add-on, you can just click this eye icon and that will turn the visibility of the last loaded environment you have back on in your scene. So if you want to do a render preview in default Blender as well as in Sensei Format, you can just tap Shift-Z. And this switches our viewport shading down into render preview mode. And so here's what we got going on in this scene. And then I'll just press Shift-Z to turn that off. But for the sake of brevity in this video, most of the time I will be activating the Sensei Format render preview button down here, just because this is a much smaller area to render, and it's just a lot easier for us to quickly get updates about the way things are looking. So right now, if we look over here in our outliner, we have no other lamps or objects using emission or anything like that. All the lighting that's happening in this scene is being done via this HDR image, which I got this one, and you can get a ton of these for free over at hdrlabs.com. And of course, you can use any panoramic image or seamless image off the internet to simply drag into Blender and use as environments for cycles or Blender render if you want with this add-on. I'm just using this nice kind of rocky nature scene here. But the first new feature you'll notice is this Use Dynamic Source here. By default, if I were to come down here and press my render preview button, and I'll just rotate my camera a bit here. And once again, if you're in default Blender, you can just press Shift-Z or change your viewport shading here to do the same thing. But we can increase the brightness of this scene by increasing this energy level, which will increase the emission of this environment. So if we drag this up to say 2.5 or so, we're able to greatly increase the lighting. But something else is happening that maybe we don't really want. And that is, while it's nice that the lighting produced from the environment is making our objects in our scene brighter, it's also kind of washing out our default background. And you may not really want that. So say you were actually using a much more dimly lit environment rather than this nice kind of bright one, and you had to turn the energy up quite a bit. Really quickly, this default image can start getting, blown out pretty badly. So to overcome this problem, we now have this Use Dynamic Source option. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is turn off my render preview down here and set this energy back to 1, which is the default. Or of course, you can just click your reset button here in the Drag and Drop Environments menu. So say you had been, working on adjusting the color here, or the brightness, the saturation, etc. Any of these values you change, you can always just press your reset button there, and that puts us back to default. And so now, instead of increasing the energy this way, I'm going to press my Use Dynamic Source button. And when I do, a new lamp pops up in our 3D view. And if I click on it, you can see that its name is displayed by default, which is DND ENV for Drag and Drop Environments Dynamic Source. And you'll also see this show up in your outliner. If you're in Blender default, then your outliner will be over here somewhere. So what this does is it creates a lamp, but then it infuses the lamp's color with the mapped environment. So if we come over here and click on the nodes of this lamp that was generated from the add-on, we can see under the color source is environment texture. And this actually links to whatever current environment we happen to be using. So what I could do now is try to rotate this lamp to be more consistent with whatever I have going on in this scene here. So you could turn on your 3D widget button here, which I rarely use this thing, but for this particular instance, it's actually kind of nice. So I'll kind of click this and move it around. See, my greatest point of light is up here, this sun here. So I want to kind of rotate this and just get it into kind of a similar position. I should mention that this is a sun lamp. Sun lamps, it doesn't actually matter where the position of the sun lamp is. No matter where this sun lamp is positioned is going to have the same effects. What changes with the sun lamp is the rotation. But sometimes it helps to position the sun lamp to figure out the rotation you want if you're trying to set up something similar to the scene here. Okay, so now if I press my render preview button down here, we have the same image-based lighting for our objects in our scene, which is awesome. But now if I increase this energy value, we'll see this get much brighter, but the background not get blown out. We actually get an additional benefit from this in terms of being able to more directly cast shadows that appear as though they're coming from the light sources within the actual environment image. So say I were to turn that off and then press Shift A and add a monkey and press G to grab. I'm going to go ahead and turn off that rotation widget because it's annoying most of the time. And in Sensei Format, you could just tap W a few times to smooth it. And so if I were to press my render preview button down here and then press G to grab, and so you can see the shadow casting between the Suzanne head here and this area back here. And this energy's up maybe a little too much. We'll lower that down some. And so you can see as I move the Suzanne head, we're able to see that casting shadow. So this just gives us more control over not only the brightness within our scene while maintaining using the image-based lighting, but it also gives us more control over things like shadows and dynamic lighting as well. We can, of course, disable this at any time. If we click this again, notice the little yellow dot will become dark and our dynamic source lamps will go away. And so if I were to press render preview down here, we're back to just the lighting from the image itself. And of course, if we adjust this energy value now, it will control once again the brightness and darkness of the HDR image, as you can see it lighting down there in the render preview. And I'll turn that off, press my reset button again, click use dynamic source. And so the really cool thing about this is we're using this image that's got this kind of one light source, the sun. But if we had a more complicated environment, we could actually duplicate these lamps and then, rotate them in different ways and create a sort of extra dynamic lighting setup. And no matter how complicated our setup becomes, we can always disable it or enable it right here. And each of these lamps that we duplicate will continue to use the environment texture that we happen to have loaded. The other awesome thing about this is that if we change the environment, so I'll click up here in my assets library here, click on environments, and then in my non-commercial folder here, which I have a bunch of awesome free HDR images from HDR Labs, which you can check out, and I highly recommend that. And so if you're not using Sensei Format, then the drag and drop environments comes with a display library option, which will do the same thing as this default Sensei Format button. So either way you want to do that, you can. So I'm in the folder with my images. So say I were to drop this cool ruins one here, just drag and drop that in there. So along with setting up this environment to render, and I'll go ahead and close this. So along with setting up this environment to render for both Cycles and Blender Render, what this has done is filled all of the color information of our dynamic light sources with these environments. So if we were to press render preview again down here, we still have this same dynamic control here and we wouldn't have to manually go around and reset these lights or something. So I can increase this energy to like a really high level here, and we still have incredibly awesome HDR image-based lighting without blowing out our background scene. So that's super, super cool. So the other really nice upgrade to the drag and drop environments is we now have these slider controls of things like rotation and scale of our environment. So if I wanted to rotate the environment, I can do it like this. I can also rotate it this way, or rotate it like this, which is nice. I can press, in the same way I can press my reset button to reset things like brightness, color, saturation, and so on. I can also press this reset button here to reset dimension control over our environment. So that's a really nice plus. Now you can actually animate these values here, but it's important to note that even though you can animate these values, the animation won't show up in the live 3D view when you're in cycles mode in the same way it does when you manually change it. The animation will take place if you're going to render. So for instance, if I were to press my reset button and then click I over this value, which inserts a keyframe, we can see down here if you're using Sensei Format. And then so if I were to right click and drag this to say 5 seconds or so, and increase this value to do some kind of rotation, and then tap I again over this value, see another keyframe show up. And so if I were to press play, we don't really see anything happening in either our camera view or in the 3D view up here. However, if I were to press my render preview button down here and press play, and then kind of just stop it periodically because we're not really able to, get a live feedback of rendered images. If we were, that would be super sweet. But you can see the environment moving as I play it a little bit and stop it. And so it's continuing to rotate as I play and stop, play and stop. So if you were to actually render this animation out, then your environment would be spinning like that. Or, your scale values, however you wanted to adjust those. I'll go ahead and disable that. So yeah, we can, do whatever we want with this kind of stuff. Whatever kind of crazed, maybe warping of your sky if you're using a sky environment. So for instance, if I go into the default sky pack, which comes with the add-on, and press my expand library button, click and drag one of these into the environment here. And then take that back and press play again. Press my render preview button again. And whoa, that's really bright. We would want to turn that energy down quite a bit. But if we press play, stop, play, stop, play, stop, we can see the environment rotating there. Well, that about does it. So I hope you enjoy these new features, and I hope they're able to help you create a lot of cool stuff. If you don't yet own the Drag and Drop Environments add-on, I recommend getting that at blendersensei.com today. Thanks for watching.